Hello everyone present here. I would like to extend my warmest wishes to you all. As we all know that beginning of something new is always exciting here. And I am talking about the new chapter, the new topic, the comedy. Comedy may be considered to be a representation of a character of a lower type. Here, lower means ridiculous which means comical, laughable. This is mean ridiculous. By presenting the character in a ridiculous manner, the writer of a comedy aims at producing laughter. Though the genre of comedy is practiced since the ancient times, with the practitioners like Aristophanes, and Plautus. The scholars have not paid enough attention towards the serious study of its nature and function. While speaking about the function of comedy, George Meredith says that comedy appeals to the intelligence pure and simple and aims not at our ribs or armpits but at our heads. It means it is business of a comedy writer to look on what else the world. He observes his environment minutely and fits out its follies and exposes them. But while exposing those follies, the purpose of writer is to correct or reform those follies. Some scholars are the opinion that the function of comedy is not to reform or to correct the follies of the world, but to provide light-hearted mirth. But while creating mirth, the comedian encourages the audience to laugh with not laugh at the follies of the world. Such kind of play is purely meant for the entertainment of the audience. Comedies are of following types. Comedies are of following type. First is classical comedies. This type of comedy is written as per the rules laid down by the ancient Greek and Roman masters. The function of such a comedy is corrective or reformative. In this comedy, human folly is exposed and ridiculed. It follows the rules of three unities: unity of time, unity of place, and unity of action. The writer of this comedy strictly avoids the mingling of comic with tragedy. Romantic comedy is a popular genre that depicts burgeoning romance in human terms. The focus on the foibles of those who are falling in love. Comedy as a whole has rarely been seen as being as critically respectable as other genres. Perhaps it is rather a self-defeating paradox to ask for it to be taken seriously. Even Shakespeare connections Even Shakespeare comedies seems to be critically overshadowed by the tragedies, perhaps diminished by the foregrounding of characters who are not heroic or noble, and themes that concern issues that can be found in everyday life, such as love and relationship, rather than elemental issues of life that go good and evil. The most respected rom-coms are those associated with and artistic figure that are expected as auteous. Romantic comedy has proved to be one of the most enduring genre. It has certainly undergone some ebbs and flows in its popularity, but as with all the major genres, it proves perennially resilient. Audience still enjoy the blueprint of the romantic comedy with all its traditional ingredients. Every year sees the release of new romantic comedies which are strongly in the mold of the earliest example in history. We want to see the same character, the same situation, the same narrative trajectory, the same setting and dialogue with new stars and speak to new generations at tell the same story. Romantic comedy does not follow the rules of writing a comedy laid down by the ancient classical writers. The writer freely mingles the comic with the tragic. The unities of time, place, and action are modified as per the requirement of the plot. The aim of such a comedy is to produce innocent, good natured laughter, thereby entertaining the audience without trying to teach anything. Now we will discuss the fourth type of comedy, that is the fourth that is Shakespearean comedy. Shakespearean comedy. Shakespeare is a great writer of comedies. His comedies are called romantic or sunny comedies. With the help of his creative imagination, Shakespeare creates a brilliant world of romance which is far away from the drab realities of the everyday life. These comedies are usually set in some distant, far off places where the inhabitants have no other business but that of love making. The lovers of Shakespearean comedy fall in love at first sight and get married at the end, but the course of their love is always full of difficulties. There, there are made a lot of misunderstandings, family feuds, tears, and signs. Shakespeare forces his lovers to face these difficulties in order to test their love for each other, but ultimately these lovers are helped to overcome these difficulties by the intervention of goddess fortune. Then comes the goddess marriage, who unites the lover in the bond of marriage, followed by music, dance, and merrymaking. Now we will discuss the four kind of comedy, that is the comedy of humor. The comedy of humor. A type of comedy developed by Ben Jonson. It is developed by Ben Jonson. The Elizabethan playwrights, based on the ancient physiological theory of the four humors that was still current in Johnson's time. The humor were held to be the four primary fruits: blood, flame, choler, the yellow bile, and melancholy, the black bile, whose temperament means mixture was held to determine a person's both physical and condition and type of character. An imbalance of one or another humor in a temperament was said to produce four kinds of disposition, whose names have survived. The underlying theory: sanguine, from the Latin sanguis, blood; phlegmatic, choleric, and melancholic. In Johnson's comedy of humor, each of the major characters has a preponderant humor that gives him characteristics, distortion, or eccentricity of disposition. Johnson expounded his theory in the introduction to his play, Every Man in His Humor, in 1598, and exemplifies the mode in his later comedies. Often he identifies the ruling disposition of the humorous character by his or her name: Zeal of the Land, busy; Dame Purycraft, well bred. The Johnsonian type of humorous characters appear in plays by other Elizabethans and remain influential in the comedies of manner by William Wycherley, Sir George Etheredge, William Congreve, and other dramatists of the English Restoration, that is from 1660 to 1700. The character of comedy of humor represents some humor. The action and behavior of the character are governed by some kind of passion. As the character represents some typical traits, there is a lack of individuality of them, rather they become stereotyped. Generally, these characters are taken from low life. The purpose of writer of such a comedy is to satirize the follies of the characters and correct them. Now we will understand the next type, that is the comedy of manner. The comedy of manner, a kind of comedy representing the complex and sophisticated code of behavior current in the fashionable circle of society, where appearances count for the more than true moral character. Its plot usually revolves around the intrigues of lust and greed, the self-interest, cynicism of the character being masked by decorous pretense. Unlike satire, the comedy of manner tends to reward its cleverly scrupulous character rather than punish their immorality. Its humor relies chiefly upon elegant verbal wit and repartee. In English, the comedy of manner flourished as the dominant form of Restoration comedy in the work of Sir George Etheredge, William Wycherley, and William Congreve. It was revived in a more subdued form in the 1770s by Goldsmith and Sheridan, and later by Oscar Wilde. Modern example of the comedy of manner includes Noel Coward's Design for Living and Joe Orton's Loot. The comedy of manner is also called Restoration comedy. Also called Restoration comedy. It focuses upon the mannerism of the upper class of the society. The character of this comedy belongs to upper class. Here the dramatists represent a fashionable man and woman with their manners, love, intrigues, scandals, and affectations. These comedies attempt to imitate everything refined, so anything coarse or low is strictly avoided. The language of such a comedy is very witty and refined. The focus of the dramatist is not on the individuality of the character but on its manner, so the characters become lifeless. This type of comedy was very famous during the Restoration period, with the writers like William Congreve, William Wycherley, and Oliver Goldsmith practicing it. The next type is the farce. The farce. This was another popular form of theatre in France and in England in 19th century. Farce consists of unsubtle physical and verbal comedy. It flourishes in a moral comedy because it is anarchical, relying on the overturning widely accepted values. The chief characteristics of farce are sexual misadventure, flirtation, verbal abuse, and comic disappear, which frequently lead to instant decision and spontaneous action. The most prolific and famous French farce writers were Feydeau and Labic wrote nearly 60 plays and helped write about 100 others. Not surprisingly, the plays lack originality and concentrate on reworking old jokes. His most famous is an Italian straw hat in 1851. Feydeau was the originator of bedroom farces, the descendant of which can still be seen occasionally in London today. Feydeau's middle period plays are the archetype of French farce. The principal character are Parisians, bourgeois. Their major driving force is extra-connubial lust, and a basic source of humor is their ever more desperate attempt to avoid being found out. Although no respectable married woman is ever seduced by her husband's best friend, it is not for want of trying on other side. The plot seems to have been constructed by a mad watchmaker, but the status quo is always restored at the end. The farce is a comedy that focuses on physical humor. The dramatist aims at creating hilarious laughter by presenting absurd characters and situations on the stage. To create his character and situations, the dramatist make use of exaggeration and extravagance. Exaggerated characters and situations, improbable coincidences, mistaken identities, and miscommunication are common techniques used by the writer to make his plot more complicated. All these instruments enable the dramatist to entertain his audience in the most direct way. Now the last type of the comedy is the mask. The mask, form of dramatic entertainment popular with the French and English aristocracy of 16th and 17th century. Developed by Renaissance Italy, the mask was probably an evolution of primitive folk rituals. When adopted by court circles, it became a lavish spectacle usually based on mythological theme and involving elaborate costumes and stage machinery. Essentially, it was theatrical performance by a group of disguised guests who, arriving at a banquet, offered the host an entertainment of dance, poetry, and music. The character in a mask wears some mask on their faces. Initially, a mask was a series of dances illustrating some story, but afterward it developed into a play. The writer of a mask chooses his character a story from mythology. Choose his character and story from mythology. These masks were written to be performed on some private occasions by a limited number of characters. There is an abundant use of music, dance, and costly costumes and elaborate scenery. The mask first appeared in the 15th century by Lorenzo de Medici. First introduced in 15th century by Lorenzo de Medici. Okay. Lorenzo de Medici adapted the seasonal revels of Florentines into sophisticated display of art and poetry for the delight of his guests. In the French court, this display evolved into the ballet decor and the masquerade. A form of the mask was brought to England in 1512 by Henry VIII, who liked to disguise himself as a player and pretend to be an uninvited guest at his own parties. Henry's daughter Elizabeth added the spoken introduction, which, with the inclusion of his speeches and elements of court drama, was developed into a unified dramatic performance in the hand of Ben Jonson, who became court poet of the Stuart in 1603. Until his time, the main feature of the masque was the dance and reveal, which the audience was invited to join. Under the Johnson's influence, the masque became a literary form, a dramatic poem of classical scholarship. Johnson also introduced the anti-masque, so called. It preceded the main masque, and because it included grotesque and comic element in the contrast at relevant to the serious main masque. Johnson's influence was eventually eclipsed by his sometime collaborator and rival Inigo John, the architect and scenic designer, to whom theatre spectacle was more important than literary content. It was John who thought of placing the liars on raised stage and who eventually, by his attention to spectacle rather than content, effected the deterioration of the masque as a dramatic form. The courtly rather than a popular entertainment, the masque disappeared with the Puritan Revolution of 1640s. When the theatre reopened in 1660, however, scenic designer, playwright and the actors took their principal inspiration not from the Elizabethan stage but from the masque of the court festival. This is all about the comedy. Like, share and subscribe the channel.